It's not a great mystery why so many video game publishers and developers are keen to get a solid live service game off the ground. Essentially, if you have a product that's good enough, it means you get to keep bringing money in, and that's good for everybody. Well, so long as the game is actually good and people in fact want to keep playing it. The financial side of producing live service titles might be a no-brainer, but to expect to maintain an audience, developers need to provide a steady stream of new content, interesting gameplay systems, and something to set itself apart from the pile of other live service games already saturating the market. In the case of the games on this list, they failed to do some or all of the above, ultimately not managing to find or maintain a player base and consequently getting the server and support axe not long after they launched. For various reasons, here are 10 live service games you will not be able to play today, but not to worry, yeah, probably wouldn't want to. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 failed live service video games with shockingly short lifespans. Number 10, Lawbreakers, 2017 to 2018. Starting off strong here with a live service game that seemed like it had everything going for it, particularly since it came from Cliff Bleszinski of Gears of War fame. Lawbreakers was a first-person shooter that released onto PC and PlayStation 4 in August of 2017. If you're sitting there thinking it's odd that the game didn't come out on Xbox One, you'd be right to wonder. Bleszinski said it was strictly business, but would later regret the move to leave out such an important platform, particularly while trying to get a live service game off the ground. The game was also originally intended to be free-to-play, but was then pivoted to a paid release. Despite receiving some positive reviews for its dual-faction format that pitted the law against the breakers and a number of varied and interesting modes, the game simply couldn't build an engaged player base. In April of 2018, developer Boss Key revealed the game was not generating enough revenue to cover the costs of keeping it online, and later that year the service was shut down and the game was removed from Steam. Number 9, Apex Legends Mobile, 2022 to 2023. It feels just as weird putting Apex Legends on a list of failed games as I'm sure it does for you to be hearing it, but that is indeed what happened when Respawn announced that Apex Legends Mobile would be no more in January of 2023. Despite the success of the main game on PC and console and the substantial critical and commercial success of Apex Legends Mobile, publisher EA weren't so convinced. They released a statement saying that despite rocketing off at launch, the game had begun to fall short in the content quality, quantity, and cadence departments. Apex Legends Mobile has been given a 90-day window before it's unplugged on May the 1st, which will mean the game will have been live for just short of 1 year. Respawn said the high-quality experience that players expect from the game wasn't sustainable due to factors beyond their control. It's all a little vague and confusing, but suffice it to say, players are not particularly pleased. The warning signs were there when it was revealed Season 4 was being delayed by over a month, but fans who were invested in the title, especially those who've been told there are no refunds for any money spent on the game, are puzzled at best and furious at worst. Not every failed live service game actually deserved its curt lifespan, and this is a great example. Number 8, Titanfall Assault, 2017 to 2018. Continuing the trend here, it seems that even if you're a AAA studio, it is super hard to get a solid mobile game off the ground, as Respawn had a fumble again trying to get players to engage with Titanfall Assault. The competitive RTS hit iOS and Android devices in 2017 and was developed by Particle City. You were primed to deploy and command a squadron of pilots and titans, among other units, in an attempt to quash your rivals. Despite the success of Titanfall and some relatively decent reviews, this game's servers were also shut down just shy of its 1-year anniversary in July of 2018. It was announced that the concept and hopes for what the game could be just didn't translate in the way that the publisher and developers envisioned. Extensive post-launch plans were hinted at, including some fan-favorite cameos and new units, but ultimately the game was abandoned before most of these could be implemented. Number 7, Battleborn, 2016 to 2021. Battleborn, or not Overwatch if you prefer, was a fairly solid game that came out at the worst possible time. Developed by Gearbox Software, the MOBA had plenty of promising elements at launch. As a hero shooter, it had a variety of interesting heroes, an engaging multiplayer format, and that Borderlands flavor thanks to its developer that had already proven popular with gamers. Unfortunately, the game just couldn't compete with Blizzard's Overwatch, another hero shooter that came out within the same window and took the industry by storm. With a little love and a lot of tweaking and updates, it's possible that Battleborn could have been refined into something great, but with players migrating across to Overwatch in droves, there was very little to be done to keep the game alive. Within 2 months of its launch, player numbers had fallen to below 1,000, and frequent complaints over the game's overly complex systems and poor matchmaking signaled the beginning of the end. The game transitioned to free-to-play in 2017, just over a year after its launch, but it would spend the next couple of years dying a slow death regardless. The game was removed from sale in 2019. In 2020, you could no longer buy things in the game, and the servers were shut down in 2021. Number 6, The Culling 2, 2018. Sometimes a live service game just comes out at the wrong time and is overwhelmed by a very similar game. Sometimes the audience for a certain type of game is assumed to be there but just doesn't materialize on launch. Then there are times where the game is just really crap. Enter The Culling 2. If you were disappointed that I included a game that had 3 decent years on the market before falling apart at the seams in the last entry, then this one is for you, which barely scraped through a single week. For the uninitiated, The Culling 2 is the sequel to Xaviant's 2017 first-person battle royale game, The Culling. This 16-player arena where you'd try to gear up and survive was actually one of the first cabs off the rank when the battle royale genre was just getting going. But in a similar move to Battleborn, it made the fatal mistake of not being PUBG. Nevertheless, The Culling 2, which upped the player count to 50, was made anyway, but sadly made a similar fatal mistake of not being Fortnite. Come 2018, The Culling 2 was released, lambasted by critics and players alike for being unfinished, dropped to single-digit player numbers within 2 days of launch, and was pulled from sale just over a week later. It certainly didn't help that this game launched on the same day as a new Fortnite season landed, but safe money says this one was gonna sink anyway. Number 5, Anthem, 2019 to 2021. Anthem is a bit like Beetlejuice. We said the phrase failed live service game too many times, and boom, it's just here. So let's talk about it. Anthem might not have had the shortest lifespan of all the games on this list, but given it was developed by BioWare and published by EA, both of whom have a track record of creating some of the greatest games ever made, there's an argument here that it's still the most embarrassing. Perhaps most obvious to players who dipped into this admittedly pretty world was the realization that everything felt soulless. Characters were bland, gameplay was boring and grindy, and the story was uninspiring. While the game was technically passable, it fell well short of critical and consumer expectations, and the joy of buzzing about the game world couldn't make up for its relentless repetition and brutal load times. Though BioWare did their best to patch up some of the game's issues quite quickly, it wasn't enough to drag in new players or keep old ones engaged. As a result, it was announced that development was being abandoned in early 2021. Number 4, Hyperscape, 2020 to 2022. If there's a trend on this list, it's that there's no such thing as a game developer or publisher so big it can't fail to pull off a successful live service video game. The next 3 entries on our list, including this one, are perfect examples of that, but we're starting off with Ubisoft Montreal's Hyperscape. Hyperscape was a free-to-play first-person shooter battle royale, and the interesting thing here is that Twitch viewers were able to affect the outcome of matches. As intriguing as that twist and the old familiar setup of 100 players on a shrinking map are, the game was criticized for its unbalanced gunplay and frustrating mechanics. The graphics and map design were up to snuff, and there were some interesting iterations on the formula, like the win condition that involved you hanging onto a crown for a full minute in order to win the match, but it simply couldn't maintain its momentum after its beta release. In April of 2022, almost 2 years after it first landed, Ubisoft announced that it failed to meet player expectations and pulled the service. Number 3, Paragon, 2016 to 2018. Another game that learned the hard way that you should absolutely not try to compete with Fortnite is Epic Games' own older child, Paragon. Released a year earlier than Fortnite Battle Royale, Paragon was a free-to-play MOBA that had you attempt to destroy your enemy's base on a symmetrical map partition with 3 lanes. 10 players were divided into 2 teams, all of which would take on the role of a hero with their own set of skills and weapons. This is a sketchy entry as it technically never made it to a full release, but it was in open beta for a couple of years until Epic Games decided that Fortnite was the favorite child. The team was reduced and ultimately dissolved in order to shift attention and resources to Fortnite, but but players of Paragon who did buy it received full refunds. On top of that, the $17 million worth of game assets were put on the Unreal Engine marketplace for free, so that's pretty cool. Number 2, Babylon's Fall, 2022 to 2023. One of the newer live service flubs on this list, you'd expect the superstar devs behind Bayonetta and Nier wouldn't have any trouble creating a live service world that people want to stay engaged with. But Babylon's Fall was just riddled with problems from the get-go. Panned across the board, Platinum Games' action RPG was set to offer you vibrant hub locations, an exciting world to explore, and cooperative questing. Instead, the challenges in the game were largely boring and repetitive, with a predictable and uninspiring difficulty gradient and very few reasons for players to re-engage. Players took issue with the subpar visuals and lack of content, and really all Babylon's Fall achieved was a crash course in what not to do when trying to make a live service game in 2022. Despite its impressive pedigree, just 6 months after its release, publisher Square Enix announced the game would no longer be supported. It'll be completely done and dusted by February of 2023, but given that exactly one person was playing it in May of last year, that kind of makes sense. Number 1, Radical Heights, 2018. We kicked off our list with Lawbreakers, so it stands to reason we'd wrap it up with the only other game Boss Key Productions made before they were dissolved, and that's Radical Heights. The Battle Royale game quickly fell under the wheel of PUBG and Fortnite, along with most of the other aspiring Battle Royale games at the time. After only 5 months of development, it rocked up in what the developer called extreme early access, like with the X and everything. So that should have been our first sign to worry. The idea was to let the community help shape the game while in its early access state, but instead, players found the game to be unpolished, underwhelming, and uninspiring. Just over a month after its release in April of 2018, the studio folded and the game was subsequently abandoned. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other failed live service video games with shockingly short lifespans. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness.